Hello and welcome to MPB's award-winning At Issue, where we discuss and debate legislation, law, policy, and politics in Mississippi. I'm Wilson Stribling. Data centers have been around for years, storing, managing, and processing information. But with the rise of artificial intelligence, we've seen the incredibly rapid growth of hyperscale data centers. Companies like Meta, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are rapidly building these hyperscale data centers throughout the country. Construction is booming, with billions of dollars flowing into states like Mississippi that are actively courting data center development. Right now, there are at least 30 data centers being built in Mississippi. But as these data centers power the AI future, concerns are growing too. One hyperscale data center can consume more energy than a sizable city. It can also require huge amounts of water for cooling. Air pollution, noise pollution, aquifer depletion, and higher utility rates for consumers have led many communities across the country to put the brakes on data center expansion. Last month, the city of Jackson placed a 6-month moratorium on data center construction to allow time to study the issue. Our guest this week on At Issue is Neil Strebing, business and economic development reporter for the Commercial Appeal in Memphis. Neil has been closely following the data center boom for more than 2 years, with a particular focus on data center development in Memphis and North Mississippi. We've asked Neil to give us his perspective on this phenomenon, looking at the pros and cons, the myths and the realities. How are different cities and states handling data center growth? And what can be learned from the data center experience in Memphis? Neil Strebing, welcome to At Issue.
Nice. I appreciate you having me. Good to meet you, Wilson.
Yeah, good to have you. There are data centers, and then there are hyperscale data centers. Can you give our listeners an idea of just how big these new data centers are and what their energy needs are?
Yes. I mean, best way to kind of break it down is there's 3 categories of data centers. You have co-location data centers, which are pretty much small server racks to where you can lease out space. Pretty traditional. You can see them in office spaces even. You might actually have one at the studio yourselves. Then enterprise and service data centers, which have been around for quite some time. And those are usually research, logistics. FedEx has service data centers, and those have been commonplace long before this AI push. The hyperscale data centers are kind of what we're seeing now, and that's kind of the big anti-data center push. Those are the artificial intelligence data centers. Those are the cryptocurrency, the Bitcoins, and those are the ones that demand a lot more water and energy and utility usage. Best way to kind of look at hyperscales is, 100 megawatt demand if you want to kind of put a threshold on it. But they could go upwards of gigawatt, 2 gigawatts. I mean, with SpaceX AI here at Memphis, they're looking to have 10 gigawatts at that hyperscale data center, between that cluster of data centers, I should say, by end of next year.
And aren't these basically just giant computers or great big buildings filled with giant computers?
In a roundabout way, yeah. Best way to kind of describe it, if you walk through like Colossus Data Center here in Memphis, I did a tour of that last year. And if you go through any kind of data center, hyperscale data center, it's essentially racks on top of racks. So you have GPUs, graphic processing units, and they'll basically be in almost their own kind of cubicle or section. And that could be, 20,000 chips, if you will. And they'll be running in their own cooling duct, and sounds almost like a helicopter if you go in the actual serving rack and room there. And with the hyperscales, you basically have series of those 20, 30, 50,000 GPU racks throughout, 200,000, 300,000 square foot warehouse. But each one's kind of isolated in its own cubicle, so to speak. Again, where it gets, for traditional data centers like service data centers, you're looking at one of those kind of racks, and that might be for, a hospital, a university, or again, like a FedEx or a logistics company using that for their own data and storage and whatever processing power they need for that. The hyperscales basically take that and create an exponential form of that.
And all of those machines need electricity, and they all get hot.
They do, yeah. As I describe it, it's kind of like Christmas tree lights, if you will. So if we're looking at XAI here in Memphis, each of those racks, and with XAI specifically, we have a couple of different data centers, 2 specifically, Colossus and Colossus 2 operating. But we're seeing with hyperscale data centers across the country, it might be a cluster of 1, 2, 3, or 4 data centers working in unison. And why I say the Christmas tree analogy is those racks with the GPUs, they basically will peak demand and then drop down fast, quick too. So, but if one of those GPUs or clusters is off or malfunctioning when that spike goes, it can kind of knock out the whole unit. So with hyperscales, why they have these kind of racks, and it could be 20,000, 50,000 chips in each of those kind of sections in a warehouse, they can isolate that problem and then keep everything running on those other units. So even if you have 300,000 chips in total at a hyperscale warehouse or data center, they're going to be separated in 10,000 and 20,000 clusters to make sure you don't have all the Christmas tree lights going off at once, if that makes sense.
One light goes off, the rest remain lighted.
Exactly, yeah.
I see. Well, the companies building the data centers and the economic development teams who support them talk about job creation, dollars spent in the local economy, and how these data centers can attract other tech industries to their areas. Aren't those legitimate claims and benefits of these big data centers?
Yes and no. I mean, there's definitely investment happening. I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars. Jobs, I think, is a bit more subjective. In Mississippi specifically, there are incentives for data centers, and I believe the threshold is a $20 million investment and then essentially a minimum of 20 full-time jobs. And they basically have to pass a threshold for those 20 jobs to pay 125% of the average salary in Mississippi, which is about 50,000. So in terms of, you have a company coming in spending $1 billion, $20 million investment, 20 full-time jobs is not all that much. And again, $50,000 as far as a salary concerned in the tech industry is quite low. So that threshold for entry for some of these tech companies, it's kind of a bargain, so to speak, in Mississippi at least. The other half of that then is, look at SpaceX AI and some of these larger hyperscale data centers across the country. You have $20 billion worth of investment coming in. You have hundreds, possibly 1,000 or so construction jobs coming in, but that's temporary. So as long as you're in a state of scale, you have construction jobs, but full-time jobs to run these data centers are minimal. I mean, even if just going from the Mississippi Development Authority's threshold to get an incentive, those 20 full-time jobs is not that much. And most of those are going to be security and basically monitoring those servers to make sure they're not malfunctioning. It's not, you can do a lot of this work remotely then. So these companies can still operate and bring in data and dissect it and go through it in Texas or California or here in Tennessee, wherever they may want to be. There's not direct full-time jobs for a lot of these data centers, despite the investment. The other half of that, not to go too far in the weeds, is kind of what's taxable and whatnot as well. Some of these data centers can qualify for research, and that also opens up a different kind of loophole as far as what is taxable and what's not. I mean, if we're going to talk about the power and everything too, some of the utilities and the microgrids as well, they can't be taxed twice at times as well. So it kind of gets pretty jargony pretty quick as far as what the return for the communities are.
We're seeing more and more concern about air pollution, noise pollution, the depletion of water supplies, rising utility rates. These have all been concerns in Memphis and to some extent in North Mississippi. Tell us about the experience there in the greater Memphis area with regard to that.
Yeah, I just mentioned microgrids, and that's kind of the big thing here in Memphis as far as how SpaceX AI has designed their data centers. They don't have a necessarily direct grid connection. They are connected to the grid in some capacity, but most of their power is through a microgrid, which is the use of gas turbines, solar panel, and then battery storage for redundancy and backup. The gas turbines have been the big issue here in Memphis and specifically in South Haven and Mississippi. Their main power plant powering Colossus 2 and their oncoming data centers in South Haven and right at the state line there between Tennessee and Mississippi are going to be powered through that power plant that right now is primarily using gas turbines. And those turbines, they make sense from a tech point of view and a company's point of view. If you're going to try to get to gigawatt of power, the easiest and fastest way to do that is through gas turbines. And we're seeing that across the country. GE Verona is one of the main companies building a lot of these turbines. And a big reason, too, is with this fossil fuel push, gas turbines essentially can yield about 75 to 80% as far as the power needed to power a lot of these hyperscale data centers. So setting up several dozen turbines and the power yield is, again, more energy efficient from a tech side. But the reverse of that then is if you're adding 60 plus, 100 plus turbines into a community, the noise and the air pollution. And that's what we're seeing here, specifically at Memphis and South Haven, is concerns with that, not having the proper emissions technology and just the sheer scale of adding X amount of turbines, and you're adding more pollution to an area that's already dealt with legacy pollution. But I mean, I can go more in the weeds on utilities and the microgrids if you want. That's an easy thing to kind of get lost in.
Well, yes, and there have been so many articles about all of this that one can get lost in a lot of it because there are a number of concerns. We've seen recent reports about more cities and states banning or at least delaying data center development. Can you give us an overview of the data center development climate? Maybe describe some of the ways cities and states are being more cautious with regard to approving these?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see across the board the last year and a half, I would say there's been a pretty big resistance. And I can't recall at least a time in my journalism career, just even my lifetime, where there's been seemingly a topic in almost every community that's the same. It seems like across the country, there's Mississippi, Tennessee, East Coast, West Coast. You're seeing city halls and community councils have these discussions towards data centers. Here in the Mid-South, Nashville, Jackson, Mississippi, they put up temporary moratoriums in place to kind of restrict things. Olive Branch, Mississippi is looking at, they can't quite put up a moratorium, but they're changing their zoning laws and ordinances to essentially create more transparency and more room for the public to have input if a data center does come in. Before kind of this big push, the only two areas that I've seen that have had significant kind of restriction in place was Atlanta and then Loudoun County, Virginia. And Loudoun County is considered Data Center Alley, has the highest density of data centers in the world. And again, Virginia was kind of, because of circumstance, they're having that density. Atlanta looked at it from the Beltway and keeping data centers outside of the city limits and basically through traffic and pedestrian well-being. We're seeing some of that still be the case. Nashville, the zoo, having a data center close by to a tourism attraction, the noise complaints. As far as how these restrictions come in place for each community, I do think that's going to be subjective. And a big part of that, too, is understanding hyperscale versus a service data center versus a co-location. A hyperscale is going to need all the power and utilities, but I do think across the country, just the two words data centers does essentially trigger a very negative connotation and reaction. The other half of that, too, is, even if you have 4 or 5 data centers coming into a logistics area, Mississippi's main interstate corridor has plenty of logistics, just like here in Memphis and Tennessee. Those empty warehouses are prime real estate for any data center coming in. Now, it might not be to the size of an Anthropic, a SpaceX AI, like the Amazon warehouse down in the data center down in Clinton. But if you add, 500 megawatt service data centers into a community or nearby region, that's half a gigawatt of energy and power, not counting the water and everything else. So that scale can add up quick. And I do think that's what we're seeing in a lot of communities so far, is that kind of pushback and that worry of scaling up. And the grid's already been outdated for several years now. So this massive push for tech and data centers, each community is going to have to fight it differently. And what that answer looks like is going to be very subjective.
Tell me what you've observed in terms of transparency as these various plans are approved, even non-disclosure agreements being signed in some cases, which is not uncommon with economic development. But when you're talking about something with the potential environmental impact, that's it seems a little less common.
Yeah, I mean, NDAs definitely aren't uncommon in development, and especially commercial real estate. But that is pause for concern with this data center issue across the board. I think here in Memphis, there was a lot of pushback initially, basically asking for questions. And the resistance and animosity against data centers has really come out from not having questions heard or a community feeling they haven't been listened to for going on now, 2 years. So that difficulty, I think, is going to continue to exist as we're seeing this across the board. But as far as the NDAs and the transparency, we're seeing an influx of a new industry. And, AI companies and AI data centers are pushing at elaborate speed. But historically in the country, very few times does capital investment meet public benefit, and that public, community, commercial kind of benefit and that cost ratio and the net positives. I mean, even from the automobile industry, you think about, at least as I look at it, think about how long it took just seatbelts to come around once the automobile industry was here. It took almost 70 years from a public safety standpoint. we're seeing all this investment come in, and from a tech side and an infrastructure side. In the case of gas turbines and microgrids and that power, that meets demand for the data centers. Now, is the job creation there? And then on the other side of that too, the public benefit of, okay, you have a couple $1 million investment coming in, but at what cost to the communities, whether that be noise or air pollution? Historically in the country, that's always been a really difficult conversation to have come forward in any community at the micro level. And I think we're just seeing it across the board in such rapid pace. It's difficult one to keep up with. And again, almost every community in the country is dealing with this conversation, and they have questions and they have concerns as far as, if you have a 300 megawatt data center coming in, how is that going to be powered? How much water is it going to use? What's the infrastructure like? Those are all dense and jargony kind of conversations that typically the public really hasn't been invested in before. And I think a lot of developers as well, so far, it's something that they're not used to. Again, from my career, I've never seen a across the board standard as far as every community kind of asking the same questions and pushing back like this. And in some ways, maybe that leads to more transparency, and we're seeing the moratoriums in place, and local leadership in some communities fight back and listen and try to put a pause up just to get a better sense of, hey, how can we create more avenues for transparency? But again, how that unfolds is going to be very subjective to each community.
You've been listening to Neil Strebing of the Commercial Appeal in Memphis. Neil, thank you for your perspective.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Now let's hear viewpoints from both sides of the aisle. We welcome Rebekah Staples and Brandon Jones to our At Issue Roundtable. Rebekah is a Republican and the founder and president of Free State Strategies. Brandon is an attorney and a former Democratic member of the Mississippi House. Welcome to both of you.
Hey.
Good to have you on At Issue. Well, billions of dollars being spent building data centers in Mississippi, the activities generating hundreds of millions in tax revenue. Of course, once those facilities are built and in operation, that revenue may drop considerably, but it will still bring tens of millions of dollars in taxes to communities. So the boom is here. The question is, are we being smart about it, and how do we make this phenomenon best serve Mississippi? Brandon, I'll start with you.
Well, Wilson, I've been roaming the halls of Mississippi Public Broadcasting trying to get someone to explain data center economics to me.
Oh.
One of the things that can be a little tough for us venture capitalists is when you say $25 billion is coming to Clinton, what exactly does that mean? Most of the benefit of that is going to be a location and layout that benefits the company, Amazon. They're going to have this thing that's going to be tremendous value to them. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to build it, so they're going to have to rely on construction costs. They're going to have people in for that, for however long that takes. Where does the equipment that goes into this come from? Where does all the sophisticated material that comprise these data centers? Probably overseas, probably at least not from Clinton, from other places. So I'm curious, and I don't know that we know the answer to this, but at the end of the day, how much of that $25 billion actually goes to these communities? I suspect it's spread around, and by around, I mean all over the place. So there's a little bit of questioning there around that, and then there's a little bit about the speed of how fast this stuff is happening. Early on, communities seem to be in line to have these things. That's shifting throughout the country as to how badly communities want these. And then there's just a lot of unknowns. So anyway, I flagged a few things as you were talking. Those are some of the things that come to mind for me that communities like ours, states like ours, are going to have to grapple with. But I don't want to filibuster.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That's not typical in your party. I couldn't resist.
Zoink.
Well, no, I agree with much of what Brandon says. I always hate to admit that. But I think, in terms of Mississippi, I think our state leaders are getting it right. So Republican Governor Tate Reeves has talked about Mississippi being having the power play initiative, where we have energy capacity, and that, of course, is attracting a lot of these investments. Now, to Brandon's point about is $25 billion, going directly into the economy, and he kind of outlined the layers what I think is interesting there, I haven't seen those numbers, but when you look at the data centers, you are right. It's building. And I know there are a lot of local contractors and large contractors based in Mississippi that are getting work. You're seeing large job creation numbers in the Metro Jackson area. There are a lot of data centers being built across the state. And so I think these are positive. We're seeing income growth. At the same time, I agree. Speed to market is great, but not at the sacrifice of transparency and accountability at the local level. At the end of the day, if taxpayer dollars, if utilities are going to be, taking on extra cost or taxpayers are contributing, then there needs to be transparency, accountability, and I think the communication would be really important, because I just got to say, and then I'll quit filibustering. Y'all know me. I'm a Free State of Joneser, got 60 acres, and if I heard that someone was bringing a noisy project that was going to take my water and pollute, I would have real questions.
I thought you were about to offer up your 60 acres.
She would be at the city council meeting. I think that's what we're hearing.
Well, that acreage is outside the city.
Okay. Board of Supervisors.
Well, let's talk more about speed. I mean, Elon Musk praised Mississippi for having what he described as insane execution speed. Now, for Elon Musk, who does things yesterday, I mean, that's a pretty remarkable statement. Do you think that's necessarily a good thing? And is that part of the plan or the I don't want to say scheme, because that makes it sound underhanded, but is that part of the effort that if you do this quickly, if you get this done fast and quickly move into all these communities, then there won't be time for questions to be asked?
Yeah, I think that is a reasonable question. I was glad to see Elon Musk say that. I mean, I'm like, all right, Mississippi on the global stage. But again, I think speed is important. You saw the governor talk about that's one of the attractions to Mississippi, is how we have a framework in our structure, in our tax structure and incentives where you can move quickly. However, if you're an elected official, if you're in a local elected, or if you're in a project, negotiation, I don't think it is in your interest, and we've seen this, not to engage those who are going to have questions on the front end. And so that can delay your speed, but, my own opinion is if you go slower and get more buy-in on the front end, ultimately that might ease your process and be faster in the longer term. But that's.
Goodness, no. Look, if Elon Musk uses the word insane and too fast in the same sentence, it is probably insane and it's probably too fast.
He didn't say too fast.
This is not a person who's known for prudence. So, no, I think that's exactly the type of thing that makes people like mine skin crawl. It's like, we are going at a rate that is challenging, and we're concerned that we're not going to get our arms around it in the best way. And I've always been a little bit suspicious that in Mississippi, if you get the money right, we'll let Mamaw get cancer, or we'll let runoff happen. And that's not good. I mean, at the end of the day, we want these to be communities that you can live in. And the other thing about the money and how this stuff actually benefits communities, with these astronomical investments that they're talking about, you ought to be able to just drive by these places on the road and see that. Like if your neighbor gets $25 billion, that's going to show up in the driveway. That's going to show up.
My neighbor has a single son, $25 billion.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. You're going to see, hey, that's going to be a new roof.
Yeah.
There's going to be some stuff going on.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm always scratching my head about is we have had these sort of ostentatious announcements over the years for economic development and economic, this is a X million billion dollar project. And then you go to the town 5 years later and it's like, man, I can't tell that it's any different than it was before the press release. And so there's always a feeling that states like Mississippi get taken advantage of. Here's the other thing. Now, cities across America are saying no. Atlanta says no. You're not building one of these in Atlanta. Nashville is asking them to move outside of Nashville. There's stuff like that. Well, you don't want to be the place that's like getting the thing that all the cool places you aspire to be like are saying don't come here. So there's a little bit of that too. And then you wonder, why do we have to give away the farm? Like, if they're now having a hard time finding these places, why don't we demand a premium for that and say, well, yeah, maybe y'all can do better than a $150,000 grant that's meted out over 10 years to the community. Seems like y'all do better than that. I don't know, Rebekah.
Yeah,
it's just all the stuff that bounces around.
No, well, I'm going to push back on some of your premises. I don't think we're talking about projects that are causing cancer for mammal, because I'd have a real problem with that. And I also have not seen, I reject the notion we're giving away the farm. I think probably this might be a little boring and wonky, but Brandon, you know this well. You voted on many of these in the legislature, but the company in most of these transactions with data centers usually enter into contracts called fee in lieu agreements with the local government. And they dictate on the front end how much that company is going to pay over a period of years. So you have guaranteed income for your county functions, for your schools. And so the reason I point that out, it's a big tool in the economic development toolbox. The local elected officials have to vote to approve it. And then at the end of the day, the company is on the hook no matter what happens typically in their project for this money. So I consider that a big win for the locals. But, I hear you, Brandon.
Is that probably the best? Like when we think about what's the great asset of it, probably the local taxpayer, right? I mean, that's where if you're looking at it from a state perspective, where will you see the greatest social benefit? Even though they may be exempt from state taxes, so long as they meet the investment and the job number,
right?
Cities are still pretty much requiring them to pay taxes.
Yes, that's right. That's my understanding. And so that's why it is very interesting when you see cities voting to have moratorium on these types of projects. And so I think they're real good questions, but I do kind of hear, and I actually spoke at a couple of conferences this summer about this issue. We hear a lot of what's being said. Is this noise pollution? Is this going to cause cancer? Is this creating 8 million jobs? I'd like to see us kind of at a baseline of just, here are the facts. Like, here is why some folks think it's going to cause noise pollution. Here's the decibel. Here's what we've seen in other states. I personally feel like I don't have all the information in sort of a just factual way.
Yeah, and just to say it, I mean, it's an important distinction you're making here, because how this is being handled at the county and city level is unique to those counties and cities. But by and large, they have been demanding some type of, hey, we expect you to do what other businesses do when you come in here, which can be of great benefit to those communities. The state, whenever I talk about Mississippi being a cheap date, I'm almost always talking about state scheme, because the state, they'll let you not pay taxes if you hit X threshold, and then the jobs number is like 20. It's like 20 jobs over the average payment in Mississippi. You know these numbers better than me, but it's a low bar. Like, companies typically don't have a hard time meeting that bar, and then they have this tax exemption. So I mean, that's what I mean by, is there some room there as they have a harder time finding locations? Is there a way to exact a little bit more, or reevaluate that?
Well, just last week, Senator Hillman Fraser, Democrat from Hinds County, wrote an editorial in Mississippi Today calling for the state legislature to get more involved in the whole data center issue, looking specifically at regulations and tax incentives. Do you see the legislature next year getting more involved in this process?
I mean, Rebekah knows I don't want this legislature involved in half the stuff it's into now. I don't want to add to it.
Brandon's like, keep them out of the kitchen.
Yeah. Well, we've got this patchwork of local ordinances that counties and cities are trying to put into effect. But what's happening on the state level? Should more be happening on the state level?
I'm going to sound like Rebekah. You got to talk. I am talking too much, but I'll just say this, Rebekah. I'll just say this instinctively. I think not, for the very reason you said, is that this is one of the actual places where we're leveraging these things to work for the community, is at the local level. I would hate to see something where the state prevented localities from getting the best deal.
Yeah. I agree. And I don't really see. I don't have a fear of that. I have seen possible and announced gubernatorial candidates talk about data centers. I've heard prospective candidates all up and down the ticket, as we've talked about on the show many times. Next year is election season. I would not anticipate the legislature would make significant changes at the local level. If there are changes, I would expect it to be maybe aligned with President Trump's like a ratepayer protection pledge that I think 23 governors have signed onto that basically talk about utility rates as it relates to data centers. And if there were anything else, I could see maybe more incentives tied to direct job creation, not fewer, but they might have to just deal with redistricting all session long. So
I don't think data center, and we should say politically, Wilson, I don't get the impression that data center is going to win you an election. This is becoming an issue that politicians have to move carefully with. I mean,
yeah.
And I think maybe initially there was a feeling that, hey, we got to get behind this. This just feels like modernity. Like, how could you be against this? And now you read those press releases. They're a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more. I don't know if I'm going to be at the golden shovel unveiling of the next data center.
Well, that's a great point. I did hear it in the Neshoba County Fair. I noted one speaker who was an announced candidate said that they were, wanting to promote job creation. And this was just my perception. I thought about data centers, and it's, I think the comment was job creation for all Mississippians without sacrificing local community control and conservation. That was my interpretation. But I will say this. I believe Republicans and our legislature as a whole are being very mindful of accountability, because I know they're hearing from locals and their voters. So I'm appreciative of what they're looking at.
Well, as data center construction continues, so will the debate over how far it should go. Thank you both, as always, Rebekah and Brandon.
Thanks.
This has been At Issue, a weekly in-depth look at legislation, law, policy, and politics in Mississippi. You can hear At Issue every Monday evening at 5 o'clock on MPB Think Radio. You can also subscribe to our At Issue podcast. And you can catch the video version, which includes our full interviews and roundtable discussions, by going to mpbonline.org/issue. If you and your family benefit from programs like ours, we encourage you to consider a donation to MPB. Just go to mpbonline.org and click on the Donate link. At Issue is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting. I'm Wilson Stribling. From all of us at MPB, thank you for joining us.